All In Sports Network. We love sports.
How's it going, everybody? Ben Peck here, All In Aggies. It is SEC schedule release day. That is going to be the main focus of our video, plus recording a little bit later than I normally like to, but trying to wait for transfer portal bombs to drop if they were going to, and we've had a few. So we're going to take a look at some developments in the transfer portal for some incoming and outgoing Aggies, or I should say prospective incoming Aggies. But we'll get to that in just a little bit later on. By the way, if you haven't already, please subscribe. It really helps us out. I want to do this full time, honestly, and make this something that we can really ratchet up and make it something that we can all enjoy, an independent voice looking at these programs at Texas A&M, and we depend on help from viewers like you. All right, so now bear with me. We're going to try to bring up this schedule here. I practiced this. All right, I'll scoot on over. So here is what you're looking at schedule-wise for Texas A&M. It's maybe a little small on your screen, but hopefully that's good enough. I'm just going to kind of have this up as we break it down. So quick caveat, we already knew who the opponents were going to be when they announced the whole SEC scheduling format going into 2024. They said that the opponents were going to be the same for 2025. You were just going to have a different order in which, well, first of all, it's home and home, right? So the teams you played at home, you play on the road. And then second of all, this schedule release mixed up the order of when and where you played these teams coming off, what bye weeks or whatever. So let's go through it from week 1 on. Week 1 and 2, at home UTSA, at home Utah State. And then that Notre Dame matchup moves to week 3 compared to week 1 for this past season. I think that's probably a blessing for Texas A&M. Coming into this year, I don't know if Texas A&M could have beaten Notre Dame if you played them a little bit later on in the year, but that's still a program that's years further along with Marcus Freeman compared to where Texas A&M is with Mike Elko. They just, I think I'm not putting necessarily Marcus Freeman above Mike Elko long term, but yeah, in the short term, with the foundation they've laid and everything else, they definitely had a step up coming into this year. So going into next year, I still think there's some moving parts that are going to be had for the Aggies trying to find their identity in some areas. So I think having them week 3, having a couple weeks to sort out some things leading into that game will be very beneficial. Then you go into the bye before you start the grind of SEC play. Now, kind of cuts both ways here. The big thing that has been a discussion that I've seen people pointing out, you get the 3 games at home, and then you have if you count the bye, you have 5 weeks before in between home games from Florida to South Carolina. Let's go through it though. Home against Auburn, I feel in Mississippi State, Florida, feel relatively good about all those games. Auburn could be a sneaky, tricky team. That's one of those, like, when will it ever start to click for Hugh Freeze and company? Losing Cam Coleman hurts for them big time, especially if he could end up, I don't know if he can end up at College Station, but you'd like to think they'll try. But losing Cam Coleman hurts either way. I think that was a bright spot you leaned on. We'll see what they do just for the rest of their roster. If they can finally round out into form the competitive team a lot of people think they're going to be. And then Mississippi State, I think still, even with taking another step forward, if they were to do so, I think the Bulldogs are still a little ways away from being really too much of a threat for A&M, specifically at home especially. Florida at home, feel pretty good about it. The caveat there is DJ Lagway. How much of a progression are we going to see from DJ Lagway leading up to week, what would that be? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Week 7 of next year. And the progression he's seen through the back half of this year, and what does he look like mid-season form as a true sophomore? And what kind of help is he going to have around him? I think that could get a little dicey. So, we saw Anthony Richardson come in to Kyle Field a few years ago and deal the Aggies a blow. That was the game where they had, like, everyone and their mother was sick with, some type of flu going around. So that My point being, Florida, though, give them an athletic quarterback. That can get a little interesting. I think, A&M should still be favored to win that game, I would imagine. But also think of this, and then this is kind of what we talked about a little bit this year. What's the flow of the season going to be by the time you play these teams? Are you of the belief that winning begets winning and you can get on a run and start to build it up, or eventually are you going to be exposed at some point when you face your tough matchup? So this is one of those weird deals where I probably prefer this over like the opposite for sure, in terms of starting off a lot at home and building up momentum and not hype, but belief amongst your team, and hopefully progressing against more manageable opponents, more manageable environments before you really get into the thick of things. So all in all, I feel relatively good about this. I think Notre Dame's team, we'll see what Notre Dame looks like. I mean, they got a good recruiting class, but they're losing a lot on defense. Obviously, they got to replace the quarterback position with Riley Leonard. If you get through that Notre Dame game, or even if you don't, if you're 2-1 and if you can go 3 for 3, I think you got to go 3 for 3 though. In those 3 games, Auburn, Mississippi State, Florida, just to give yourself the wiggle room between not only the Notre Dame game, but what you have coming up next. And then you go to Arkansas. Now, Arkansas, I mean, it's always close, right? In Jerry World this time. It won't be in Jerry World. It'll be going back to the campuses. And, of course, we start at Fayetteville with the Aggies' luck, because this past game was a home game for Texas A&M at AT&T Stadium. Arkansas is a tricky, kind of one of those tricky places to play. They are losing a decent amount in the portal from what I've seen, just in terms of outgoing players. But I don't know, Sam Pittman back for another year. Bobby Petrino really starting to hit his stride. If they can get things going, maybe they can be problematic, especially on the road. That could get tricky. And then you follow it up with a trip to Baton Rouge and LSU. That game, I think, will be, if they can get their act together and have a good portal window, I think that game will probably be a very challenging environment for the Aggies. Garrett Nussmeier says he's coming back. That was announced earlier today. So you've got that to deal with. I don't know how high I am on Garrett Nussmeier in totality. I think he's good to a point. Just like the game we saw against A&M. When he's not making mistakes, he can dice you up pretty well, but I just don't know consistency-wise how much faith, if I was like a Tiger fan, how much faith I put in him. But those games will be tough back-to-back. You get the bye, a reprieve before going to Missouri. Now, and this is sort of a twofold on Missouri and A&M. If the trajectories are not misleading, I think this should be a game A&M should win fairly comfortably on the road. I'm not saying run away with it, but by SEC road trips go, I think that Mizzou game needs to be, if this program is where it wants to be, and then if maybe some concerns about Mizzou are not unfounded, I think that could be a game late in the year, sort of like the Auburn game was this year, where you should be able to take care of your business and you should be able to come out with a win in that game. Even this far out, I think you should be able to say that. But just like the Auburn game, how confident are you that that's going to happen? How confident are you that you're going to play up to your ability? That will be where time will tell. Then you come home for South Carolina. I think South Carolina is going to be really tough, a really good team. I know I got some flack for what I said about A&M's chances going to South Carolina. I kind of said, I just don't see South Carolina pulling off the upset and all that. And obviously that didn't work out. In my defense, there were a couple things in that game, and I'm not going to rehash the whole prediction, everything about it. But, I think they came in with one of the worst offensive lines in terms of protecting the quarterback, and Lenora Sellers did not get taken down in that game. And as far as Lenore Sellers goes, this was a game where, leading up to the A&M game, I just read some of his performances for you. You had 114 week 1, but 114 against Old Dominion, 166 against Kentucky, LSU 113. He got knocked out of the game there, got hurt. Then 162 just blown out at home against Ole Miss. Ole Miss though, pretty talented, 27-3. Alabama, that was somewhat of a coming out game, 238, but two touchdowns, one pick on the road, had them in it down to the end. Oklahoma 175. That's a good defense though at times. And then from A&M game on, and this was after a bye for South Carolina and Lenore Sellers, the A&M game, still just 13 for 27, but 244, 2 touchdowns. Then you had 238 against Vandy, 353 against Mizzou, 307 against Wofford, 164, but it turns into Superman against Clemson, 166 on the ground, 2 touchdowns, 106 on the ground against the Aggies. And he was running a little bit against some other teams early in the season. My point is, South Carolina really turned the corner right when the Aggies played Texas A&M, or right when the Gamecocks played Texas A&M. When the Aggies played the Gamecocks, I think that trend will continue. I was a believer in Lenore Sellers long term. I did not think leading up to that game I had seen enough to think he's going to be able to find his stride against the Aggies necessarily, but he did, and he caused problems. And they had other issues in that game. There were 2 fourth down stops. They weren't tackling anybody. I don't think you would have necessarily seen that coming. But by this point next year, late in the year, they got the thing rolling. I do believe in South Carolina. I would not sell my South Carolina stock if I had any. And I think that is going to be a very challenging game at home. Then Samford, and you wrap it up at Texas. Texas should be right there in the mix, I would imagine, if they take care of their business. Arch Manning leading the way at this point in overwhelming likelihood. So I think that game will always kind of be a banger to end the year for both teams. But, gut, I'm not going to do a gut win-loss projection. Obviously so much to figure out with the portal, right, and everything else. But just with what I would imagine these teams do moving forward, I think you can and will and need to go 3 for 3 in that stretch in late September, early October to start off 3-0 in the SEC. I think you need to. I'd really like to see A&M win that game against Arkansas. But if we're going to say 9-3 sort of gets you in the conversation to make a 12-team playoff, where can you afford to slip up? Or where are the 3 spots? Where are the spots you need to give yourself a little leeway? I think at Notre Dame could be tricky early in the year. At LSU, depending on how the Tigers look. Home against South Carolina. South Carolina might be sort of the hinge game of if this is going to be that 9-3 or 8-4 season. And then at Texas. I'm not saying the Aggies can't beat Texas. I just, Texas is going to be very good. So I don't think you want it to come down to a must win over Texas. I would like the Texas game to feel like, hey, things are going pretty well, and this is the cherry on top, the exclamation point. So that's what you have. The upcoming schedule for 2025 and Texas A&M, and that is what it's going to look like there as we bring me back to full. And now we'll talk a little transfer portal. If you haven't already, subscribe to the channel. We have all sorts of Aggies content all over the place in all these different sports. We're going to break down the Purdue game for men's basketball coming up this weekend, talk about that preview and after the fact as well. And now let's get to some transfer portal talk. Big development in the portal. Well, let's start with the perspective development. Micah Hudson, projected by Steve Fongbaum, that he has predicted, along with Pete Nakos over at On3, that Texas A&M will land Micah Hudson. True freshman this past year, 5-star wide receiver. Hudson. Numbers don't jump off the page since the last 4 games of the year. But 8 for 123 yards. Again, that's not going to go too crazy, but I think worth pointing out, a lot of raw talent. If I remember correctly, Texas Tech kind of had a wacky up and down season with some injuries along the way, and nonetheless, something like that. So I like Micah Hudson. I'm a believer in Micah Hudson. I think, we cover him here in our area, the Lake Belton kid from Bell County. A&M, we talked about the other day how badly they need wide receivers in the portal. I think between Micah Hudson, Kevin Concepcion from NC State, and Cam Coleman from Auburn, I'd like to see the Aggies honestly get at least two of those players. But, if I'm not going to be greedy, you need one, though. You at least need one, in my opinion, because the rest of that room is just so paper thin. So that would be a huge get. It's going to be a sophomore building block. If you can build a connection with Marcel Reed, that would excite me as, someone who watches the Aggies. So that's kind of where my head's at with Micah Hudson. I believe he has visited Texas A&M in the portal. So that is exciting there. We'll see. We'll see what the future holds. I think Cam Coleman, by the way, from what I've gathered, seems less likely. Nick Anderson's out there from Oklahoma as a guy you've seen some buzz with Texas A&M. That might be a nice little piece as well. So it's not boom or bust with all those guys. But really, I think Micah Hudson's probably top of the list priority-wise. Kevin Concepcion, just because he's only got the 1 year left, probably right after him. And then, Nick Anderson, guys like that. Cam Coleman, if you can get him on campus, would be awesome. But we'll see. We'll see how it goes. And that is where things stand with Micah Hudson. Lastly, a congratulations to Conner Weigman announcing he will be going to Houston out of the transfer portal for next season, presumably the rest of his college days. Really mixed emotions for him. I mean, he poured his heart out to Texas A&M and really gave everything he had. I think he was failed by not even Jimbo Fisher specifically, but really just like the offensive line. Like they had a good thing going with him, sophomore year, even leading into sophomore year. I mean, the Auburn game, before that game, his numbers were crazy. I think people, some maybe newer A&M fans or A&M fans who maybe plugged out or took themselves out of things when things started going south quickly, tuned out, I should say. You may forget how good and promising Conner Weigman looked at times. I know a lot of people are well aware of it, but this past season was just sort of out of character. Maybe that was the Colin Klein dynamic. I'm not saying anything wrong about Colin Klein, but like Weigman not fitting in seamlessly to a Colin Klein offense. But I think in Houston, he'll probably be able to go there. They'll be able to build around him. I mean, I'm looking at these numbers from sophomore year. Sophomore year, he goes from I don't know how many games. I can't remember how many games he played in this past year, but through 3.5 games as a sophomore, 69% completion percentage, 68.9, 979 yards passing, 8 touchdowns, 2 interceptions. And then you go before that, 8 touchdowns, no interceptions in 4 games, I believe, as a freshman. So Conner Weigman, I think all the potential in the world coming in. We'll put it this way. Coming into this year, Conner Weigman, 16 touchdowns, 2 interceptions. That'll play just about anywhere. But his completion went from 55 to 69, back down to 56, 3 picks, 5 interceptions. And really, the thing that was more concerning for me was, I mean, look at this. He got sacked only 3 times, actually, that sophomore year, but 9 times this past season. Got sacked 9 times. And I just don't think the Aggies were able to find a way with him in there to, when things were going south, to get out of it. And I think things kind of compounded. Some of it was on Conner. Some of it was on various parts of the offense. But going to be excited to see what he can do out there in Houston with the Cougs, the Big 12, much more manageable. I still think he has all talent in the world. And, playing in the hometown, we'll see what he can do. Wish him nothing but the best. Wish you nothing but the best. We thank you for stopping by the All in Aggies YouTube channel. Ben Peck here. If you haven't already, please subscribe. Help us out. Do us a big favor. Help me make this a full-time operation where we can really pour our heart and soul into this thing. Like the video, comment, and let us know what you think about either Micah Hudson, transfer portal needs, what you think about Conner Weigman going to Houston, and most importantly, as you see with the title of the video, the schedule for 2025 Texas A&M football. Thank you so much. Hope you guys have a great evening, and we'll see you later on.
All in Sports Network. We love sports.